Evgeny, I hear beeps, but nonetheless, it's 3 minutes past 5 o'clock. Let me take that as a starting point. I usually say top of the hour, and it's still top of the hour, although it's 3 minutes later. Anyway, warm welcome here from Malaga in Spain. This is another Liquid Experience call entitled Workation, a new trend, question mark. And I think actually we have the answer. It is a new trend, but let's discuss. And if you are following our Liquid Experience call, you know that my name is Roger. I'll be leading this session. That I usually give a brief introduction into the topic, and this time, for the first time, I must admit, I'm a little bit at a loss. And the reason is that I had a misconception, I guess, about what this really is. And I learned from our experts that I was wrong. The way I initially looked at it was kind of from my personal perspective of an expatriate looking for work from a European company that would allow me to stay in Malaga and work remotely permanently. It's a full-time job. And we quickly found out during our preparation call that is a misperception because, workation is about working remotely for a kind of brief period of time. And one should have known that just by looking at the word itself. It's a combination of work and vacation, and vacations, of course, are brief periods of time. It's a short period that you're on vacation. It's not permanently. So, but then actually my trouble started of not knowing what to say, because I'm thinking this is a no-brainer. Of course, then workation is good. If workation means that people go on vacation and then instead of going back to wherever they live and work from the office again and work from home again or wherever, they stay a little bit longer and work from where they actually are. What's the fuss about? What's the big issue? Shouldn't be a problem, because it would allow you to, I don't know, stay a little longer with your parents, maybe stay at wherever vacation point you are for the whole extent of your kids' vacation. Summer vacation is 6 weeks, so maybe you take 2-3 weeks of vacation, and the rest of the 3 weeks you work where your kids can lie on the beach or have fun. So it seems to me there shouldn't be a big fuss about it or things to talk. But it seems like there is something that people want to discuss, and there are legal issues. So I'm happy to have our experts with us who will enlighten us on the different aspects that need to be discussed. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Katharina Reus. She's director for global legal operations at I have to watch Mundi Pharma, a global pharma company. We have with us Dr. David Stopppelmann. He's an employment lawyer, partner at Pinsent & Mason, which is an international commercial law firm. And also with us today, Sten Günsel. He's a partner at Ebner Stolz, which is a German auditing and tax consulting company. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to the show. Katharina, let me start with you. When we had our call, the call that made me realize I had it wrong, I asked you why you're interested in the topic, and you said you were recently on a sabbatical. You lived in Bali, Indonesia. You're a manager. You have people working all over the globe that you enable and allow to do workation. And I think you also mentioned the concept of new work, which got me interested in hearing what is your take on workation. And how does this concept of new work fit in? What is it? Do you see a relation between the two?
Well, I guess the way I generally, for myself, for managing people, life in general, I try to look a little bit at, if we imply restrictions, rule processes around things, usually we do that because we see value add in these things. So we serve a certain purpose. And but I think it's also important every once in a while to look at the processes and the rules we've established and ask ourselves, do they still add this value? Do they still fit in? And I guess COVID, this was the last kind of point where people all of a sudden realized that we probably could look at our working environment. We could have probably done that earlier. There was just no trigger point. But I guess with all the technology we're having now, with the flexibility, with the globalization and people working all over the globe anyway, I guess there is some flexibility and some more, liberty around the question where and when people work. And I think this in and out of itself, that we have the possibility and that it's not necessary you know, absolutely necessary anymore, that everyone is always in the office in order to conduct work, right? Should bring us to the point where we look at the concept again. I don't mean we need to like throw everything out of the, you know, out of the window and start over, but it brings us a new situation, and it allows us to look at it again. And I guess that's what's symbolized for me by the term new work. It's not changing everything to new. It's just looking at how have we done things, which new possibilities do we have? Can we leverage them in a way that we still add value, but maybe, you know, even adopt better? And that's my take on it, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And you mentioned the pandemic that actually catapulted us forward 10, 20 years, I don't know, into the future. And David, let me come to you. That may have created this trend that you see happening, where you say it's kind of it's a global trend over all geographies and all industries, that people, the employees, want this. They request it from their employers, and the employers, if I understand correctly, come to you and ask you, how can we actually do this? What are the legal implications, and how do we do this right? So what do you tell them? What needs to be observed and be taken care of from a legal perspective for employers to enable their employees to do that?
Thanks, Roger. Maybe before I come to the legal circumstances, just let me share one observation. I think I recognize at least a slight disappointment in your voice when you said it's not about the longer stays. And I mean, yeah, you're completely right. I mean, it's not about. I think it's not primarily about people with that mindset staying somewhere very long, digital nomads, or however you would like to call them. But I wouldn't say, and I think that's an interesting point, that this is something bad or negative, because I think you need to see that it's probably not about the first movers or these digital nomads. It's rather about, let's call them normal employees with classical work and lifestyles. And the big chance in that is that this is a very big group, and this has the chance to become sort of mainstream. In German, I would say this is the chance to make this topic salonfähig, mainstream, socially acceptable, whatever you would like to say. And this is where we come to the employer. It leads to a situation that the employer can't ignore this topic, and they need to handle the legal situation, because many employees ask for that, and these are also employees who are not really digital nomads or digital natives or whatever, but just normal employees. So this really has a chance to change some sort of mindset in the bigger big business world and workforce. And so many employees have to face this situation, and that's what we see. We got a lot of requests in this respect from all areas and branches. So really interesting. And yeah, the legal, you said it's just about a few weeks, so it doesn't seem to be complicated. You're right, but on the other hand, it affects a lot of different areas. And I think the main thing why it's complicated is that, there are so many aspects in it. I mean, you need to look into every single jurisdiction or location, destination where you want to go. So you need colleagues from everywhere to find a proper assessment. Many different legal areas are affected, and also individual aspects of the employee. Maybe in a nutshell, the key things you need to consider are, I'm the employment lawyer, so I start with the issues I can cover. It's social security things. You need to make sure that, usually you want to make sure that the employees stay in the German social security system, and that there are no big impacts on this, which is usually not so complicated when you stay in the European Union. When you leave the European Union, this can become by far more complicated. Then you have employment law issues. You need to make sure that employment law is similar there, and they comply just with the local laws. And you have some immigration issues which are also rather limited if you stay in the European Union. The biggest issue is, and probably Sten can tell more about that than I can, but I learned a lot in the projects I made. The main issue is the tax thing, the risk to establish a permanent establishment in the country where you send or where an employee goes. And if that realizes, implications, consequences are quite big, and that's why companies are sort of afraid and handle different countries quite differently. Spain, for example, where you sit, that's at least what I learned from the tax colleagues, is very complicated in this respect. They're very restrictive in seeing a stay as a permanent establishment.
Yeah, interesting. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, later during the discussion. Stan, first question to you. I know from our personal contact that in your career you lived in different countries, and I remember one night we were having dinner and you told us, it's not easy to be on a secondment, to be in a different country, because the first 6 months you kind of arrive, you have your family with you, and it's complicated. You try to settle in. Then when you leave again, you need 6 months to prepare that, go back to your old job or find a new job, and also for the family. And in between, you have maybe a year or maybe 2 where you can actually enjoy your life. So I was wondering if, secondment is obviously something that the company wants from the people, from the employees. So that's different from workation, where the employee says, I want to be there and there and there. So that's one of the crucial differences. But I'm wondering if maybe secondment wouldn't be taken up by so many people, or maybe would be, or vocation could be an alternative to secondment, in the sense that it offers the possibility to work remotely at a nice location, and maybe for shorter times with not all the hassle attached to it. Anyway, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, and how you see vocation and the issue of secondment, maybe from your personal life as well.
Yeah, Roger, thank you so much. But when I saw this question, I thought, why for Roger is comparing that at all? Because these are totally different things.
Well, set me straight.
I would like to explain that a bit. And you are making already the point. When you speak about secondments, there is a specific target to be achieved, which usually means you have to go for your employer to a specific place to perform with a specific team a task. Yeah? And that requires relocation, usually. So it can't really properly done by remote work. Compared to the expectation, and I totally agree with Katharina as well as with David, it's something which comes from the employees. Yeah, the employers really don't have an interest in that, beside the point that there is a big demand, and if you want to keep talent, you have to give it a response. But there's no such a target that you have to be at a specific place within a specific team, do a specific job. But you do your standard job, but at a place the employee is choosing. So this is a totally different concept, and therefore I would say secondments are still needed, yeah, and there are plenty of tools doing that, but it has really nothing to do with what we would call remote work, cross-border, workation, whatever, yeah. What we see in reality, and therefore the wording is even misleading, but nobody found a better word yet. Yeah, it really has nothing to do with vacation anymore. In the beginning, it was like, okay, I'm at a nice place, I stay a bit longer. But when you look at reality now, is that for whatever private reason, employees are asking, couldn't I do my job from XYZ? Because pandemic and technology is showing it works. It just works.
Cool. So thank you. The floor is open. Let's have a discussion. I've got many things to say, but I want to hear from David and Katharina also, and from you, Stan, more. What's your let me say what I just had in mind. I mean, secondment is also about promotion, really salary raises or whatever. Like you said, you get sent somewhere. But what I really was wondering if maybe some people wouldn't. That's how I got the connection, Stan. Maybe some people wouldn't even think about that as much. I think one of the drivers is that you're in a nice location. And if maybe now I can go to my employer and say, I want to be there for a couple of weeks and then there for a couple of weeks, maybe I wouldn't have the drive to move everybody over to a different country. That was my thinking, but happy to hear what everybody thinks.
Of course, in an ideal world, there is a business need and the employee calls exactly for this place to be. But I'm wondering, Katharina, whether you came across such a case. I have someone in my team, she is in Poland at the moment on a parental leave. And of course, we are trying to combine her with our Polish partner instead of calling her back. Allowing her to work remotely from there and combine it with the business need. But this is poor. Yeah, it just happens to come planet. Yeah. But Katharina, did you come that across?
Well, I think actually I do understand why this all is intertwined so much. And in my opinion, that is because it's just not a monocausal thing. I think after I think what we're seeing now with where do I work, it's the discussion we've seen 10 years ago, when do I work, right? So same thing. We went through a phase where people started saying 9 till 5, this is not my concept. And then more and more companies shifted towards flexible working hours, these kind of things. So now we're seeing, I think, the same development with the place, the location. And the driver behind both aspects is actually, this is our kind of postmodern individualistic setting. People want more flexibility. They want solutions that fit to their life, and they're less willing to fit into those box solutions ready-made for them. Especially, like, we talk a lot about the millennials, and this is the generation we really need to deal with in these questions, right? Like the majority of the workforce is not even yet there, but more and more are coming in. And I think this is actually it. And this is also what makes it complicated. And maybe David can say more about like what kind of cases are presented to him. But I think it's exactly that. It's not like a company can up with one solution for the problem, but there will be people who want just to extend their vacation. Others say, I want to travel 3 months a year, right? And I still want to work. Others say, I have family, I have, parents, I'm an immigrant or whatever. I want to, split my time between my former home and my new job. And others want to, like you, Roger, want to work completely from somewhere else. And all of this goes back to, I have an individual life approach, and I want my work to fit to my life, and I don't want to, customize my life around my work anymore.
Yeah, just a brief comment to our listeners. We do not, we're not set up for allowing questions, but I'm very happy for you to write questions into the chat. We will hopefully have time to read them out, and then we can talk about it, but no live interaction with the audience at this kind of call. David, let me pick up that question that Katharina asked. So which people are asking? I mean, is it just the millennials, the young people who want this, or is it, from your perspective, is it everybody, like the old guys like me as well?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's really the drivers are really the people. I wouldn't have seen a case where it fitted to the business's requirements to send someone somewhere. I wouldn't rather say these are really two different things. But in the projects I made, it was really interesting because in many cases there was a certain development you could see where also, let's say, the older, maybe more conservative people really got attracted by the idea. Because I mean, you can make vacation wherever you want. This could be your holiday home in the Netherlands or wherever, or somewhere much far away. So there's something in there for everybody. And I wouldn't say it's something only for the millennials. It is rather a broad group. And I also think it's very close connected to COVID as many of the developments, because what I often see that people say when the employers needed our flexibility to continue business, we were willing and able to work from everywhere, from home or whatever was expected. And then it's only logical that the employer now are willing to let us work from where we want, because everybody saw that it was just possible and work pretty well. I think that's an important point.
Yeah, let's take that employer perspective, because it seems obvious that this concept is good for the employees. I can do, what is in my interest. Sten, you said from an employer perspective, it could be a necessity to comply with it or facilitate it in some form because you want the good people to come with you or stay with you. And if other companies are offering, they might go away. Another reason, Katharina, that I heard you say is that the company might also save office space. So the same argument that was made for the home office in general. And what I'm wondering, is there also another reason that the employers might have, because they might just motivate people? I'd like, maybe that comes back then to what you said, kind of in the war for talent, giving them what they want. But from the employer perspective, is there other reasons why this is a good idea, and what's an advantage for them?
That's a nice question. When I look at the questions popping up here, it is simplified saying driven by two factors. It is the employees, the candidates asking for that. And there's a big difference between the older one and the young ones. The older ones scratch their head twice or 3 times before they come up with the question. but we have usually a pretty clear idea where we want to spend their life and live, and the young ones. And the young ones do not hesitate at all to ask that question. So the latest I came across was pretty straightforward. A colleague was calling me by saying, I have a nice candidate, but she wants a statement in the labor contract allowing her per each year to spend 3 months in the world at her disposal.
Now we're getting
no specification, just I think that is where you see the difference in the generations. But at the end of the day, we talk about the same topics. And the other factor is, of course, there's a war of talent, and there are companies out there who want to go with the changing reality, who want to be seen as attractive. So they are kind of promoting it. And of course, you can judge the companies in a certain way, the ones who want to be in the front runners and the one who have maybe a closer eye on compliance issues, are a bit conservative, etc.
So from our discussion, I remember I'm looking at Bernhard's question here. Why is it so difficult? You know, what's the problem with setting this up and kind of facilitating employees' interest? And David, from your statement, I learned that the tax issue is a big one. Let's say I'm saying I want to be in the Canary Islands or Malaga, which is a beautiful place. Unfortunately, now the company doesn't have a branch there, but by me being there and being there for a certain period of time, it might qualify in the eyes of the Spanish authorities as the company establishing a branch in Malaga. And now all of a sudden I'm subject as a company to all kinds of social security and tax and other regulatory issues that create a big headache for me. And I'm saying, just for this one guy, why should I do it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the case. As I said, the tax issue is the biggest one. And if that happens, you're taxable in Spain just because of that circumstance. And that's something companies obviously want to avoid. It often does not only depend on the pure legal situation, but rather on the practice of the authorities. And what I learned is that Spain is, as I said, rather restrictive, maybe also a rather commercial method to try to make money with that. Not sure if that's the case, but it might be. And yeah, and it's, I mean, it's unlucky that it's, for example, Spain, a country where really many people would like to make a workation. And maybe coming back to the point you mentioned before, to demonstrate how important it is. The last project I had for a big retail company, they were really fighting for each destination. Spain, for example, was a very big discussion. They weren't, I mean, they are rather conservative in their legal risk affinity, and still they discussed and tried whether there's any way to still do it, because they said it's not just great that we can offer workation in general to our employees, it's also important that we cover all the important touristic spots. So there you can see how important for them it is, and the driver is just to make it attractive for their people and also for themselves. I mean, I had many discussions with the people who were themselves quite sad about certain destinations who fell out of the scope. So very interesting.
Yeah, and
David,
yeah, please.
Sorry, I would just like to challenge David on one thing, because I do like this discussion about establishing a branch. I know that very well from virtual headquarters strategies, right? And I always felt, because there's a little bit different, like it's this idea of we have a headquarters established somewhere, but not all our central global functions do actually work there, but they work across the globe. And I feel companies have established practices to mitigate the risks around that, right? So can't we leverage that, or is there a difference between this situation and the one we are facing here with Workation?
I mean, Sten, you're probably deeper in this tax thing, but the discussions I follow were always, of course, most of the companies are doing quite a lot to avoid that risk, and then there's a completely new trend, and they of course doesn't want that to challenge complete newly this situation. This is just something which they haven't had before, and they haven't considered in their strategy. So it's something to consider on a new base. But Sten, maybe you want to add something on this.
Yeah, happy to take that on. Katharina, you're absolutely right. It is not different from the older discussion about having a management person somewhere else which was always suitable to create a taxable permanent establishment. And the question in the past was not about whether it does or not. The question was whether the country the persons are in there follow this up or just take it as it is without having any consequences and requesting any registration. So the topic itself didn't change. But what has changed is it has become so popular that authorities have an eye on it. Yeah, and you can go even closer than Spain. So as a tax advisor, I have to give a big thank you to our Austrian neighbors. Yeah, because they found in their rules a rather old rule saying after 30 days, there's a payroll PE, which requires a registration of the company in Austria. Yeah, so and it's even not created by pandemic. It was there before, but nobody cared about it. But with the pandemic situation, we were learning there are so many people staying longer than these 30 days in Austria. Let's call for a registration. Yeah, and that really gave a kind of wake-up call to this topic. Yeah, and there are even other countries, Sweden, 15 days only. Yeah, and sometimes you ask yourself the question, who for the hell is thinking about such rules? We are in the European Union. Yeah, how does this happen? And the answer is pretty straightforward. Social security is kind of subject to coordination. We are used to that. Yeah, tax not. Tax is still a national thing, and we are all battling for the same piece of cake. So think about it. So from that point of view, I totally agree with you, David. Tax is an important trigger. At the end of the day, it can be managed. Yeah, you have to give it a rules framework, and you need to monitor what your employees are doing.
Exactly. That's maybe also a new aspect, because when you send people somewhere in terms of assignment or secondment, it's very transparent what they do. I mean, you know where you send someone. When you open that door for Workation and you don't monitor that very closely, it could happen that a bigger part of your workforce is maybe in the same country, in Spain, for example, which obviously leads to a higher risk that this leads to a permanent establishment than if it's only one, or it's always 2 or 3 in a row all the time, which also leads to certain risks. So this is something which is by far more complicated than it has been before.
Yeah, it's interesting. So nobody wants to go to Iceland. Everybody wants to go to Spain. But
I wouldn't say this. It's also covered. Yeah, I mean, the last time they firstly decided for a scope of half of the European Union and then extended it to the whole European Union. So I wouldn't say that. And it's not only for pure touristic reasons. I mean, countries like Turkey, for example, are very interesting because many companies employ a lot of people from there. Or so this could also be drivers, not only pure touristic reasons.
I have a question for Katharina, for you, and I want to lead up to it a little bit, because one of the things that Sten said, again, made me realize that maybe I have too much of a kind of one-sided view on it, because I had a suspicion, Stan. My suspicion was that the companies would allow their managers and the top people, the hierarchy people, to do this, and they wouldn't do it for the simple, Joe Sixpack. But what I just said resonates with what David says. It's not a matter maybe as much of the hierarchy of the level; it's a matter of the quantity. So if you now have every employee, it becomes such a big number of people wanting to do it that the authorities wake up, and it creates these issues with the target companies. Katharina, what I wanted to ask you, and please feel free to say whatever was in your mind before, but I was struck by the openness and the lenience you showed when you said, yeah, of course I allow my team members to do this. And I wanted to bring it in connection with the discussion that we had on remote working at all, because first there was the fear that if people are at home, they will not work at all, right? I mean, because people are lazy and what they will do is just not work. And that has been disproven. I think that's fair to say. People do work. And what I read, though, however, is that efficiency might even go up. People might even get more done. But what I've also read is that innovation is going down. So it seems to be that the lack of exchange, of having contact with fellow workers or listening on the hallway, what's going on, decreases the ability to be kind of innovative and come up with new ideas. I was wondering how you see that and how you practice it in your own team? Do you have this confidence to your people, that they will do okay?
Well, one of the challenges is I have a global team, so we are spread out, right? So I don't have the benefit that probably most of you have, that you have one office and then an entire team that's kind of living close to the office. So the alternative is always, do you see each other or don't? So for me, we are Cambridge-based. So my assistant, for example, she sits in Cambridge. I have to deal with it. I'm in Frankfurt, right? So it's an interesting setup in that way from the start. And so maybe I don't have as many trade-offs in that regard. What I think is, and that comes back also to what David said, and I think that's very right. How do you monitor it? I would love, like, if I'm allowed to dream about the future, I would even think that we embrace that more, that we, for example, construct company programs around that thing. And that comes back to the question, may the company itself have an interest in what we are discussing besides just meeting expectations? So a theme that comes up a lot is like actually building networks, curiosity. These are, like, in HR terms, big words, how we want to develop our people. So what I always thought, like when I'm traveling, and I do quite a bit work and travel at the same time, business trips, but also, this kind of staycation thing. So I'm often trying to settle up myself in co-working spaces, for example. And I found these are great places, actually, where you do meet interesting people. They usually have programs alongside just the option to work. I always see this in the IT space, where a lot of freelancers are that are constantly working and traveling, or, more the digital nomad kind of style. But they have workshops, they have labs on certain topics. There's a lot of free-floating stuff of ideas. So I'm always thinking, why shouldn't a company, for example, pick one of those countries that are a little bit safer in terms of tax issues, and co-invest into a working space there, and offer free working spaces, for example, 1 month a year for employees who want to do that. And then you maybe even host a, I don't know, IT hurdle every night, or whatever your thing is. But there could be a lot of there could be a lot of creative thinking around how you can do it and how you can do it in a safe way, which is also in the interest, maybe in the end of the company. So, yeah, I guess we just need to be open about it.
Let me connect this to a comment that I find in the chat from Wolfgang, and asking, I think it goes in the same direction, to look at this even more progressively, to take it a step further. What if vacation and work are mixed within a day, maybe different time zones? Surfing in the morning, working in the afternoon, would that be, what about insurance, labor law, EHS issues? So it goes in the same direction of taking even a more progressive view on that, in the sense of why wouldn't we make it possible for people even to work kind of part-time at a remote thing? Let me ask Stan, is that an issue or David as well? Is that an issue from a tax or insurance perspective, if it were now part-time in addition to remote working, or is it the same issue?
It's the same issue. Yeah, tax doesn't care whether you work an hour or 8 hours. Okay. Tax cares about where do you work. So doesn't matter how long it is. Social Security, pretty similar. Okay, there might be a timing issue already playing in. It's probably more something David should talk about, because from a labor law perspective, the rules are still pretty strict. And when I look at our lovely new legislation ahead, monitoring the working time and tracking it, goes totally into the other direction, doesn't it, David?
That's interesting point. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make it more complicated. The vocation doesn't make it more complicated, because in Germany we have more or less the most restrictive law in the European Union, and probably also in the world in this respect. So I think it doesn't make vocation more complicated. But of course, you have questions like, can I go into a country in a different time zone, and is it possible to work from there? This is partly an employment law question, but primarily a business operation question. And as a company, I think you need to take a very clear decision whether you want to enable that or not, and to what extent, and make it as transparent as possible. We have had these discussions in most of the projects, and we always recommended making it as clear as possible from the very beginning, so that you don't have this discussion in every single case. As long as you stay in the European Union, it's pretty easy. But when you go to Asia or transatlantic or wherever, it becomes much more difficult. And I mean, then you need to make sure that people can still work together. But this is not only due to time zones. It could also be if you I mean, there are so many reasons why you are maybe not the perfect person to work remotely. Maybe not in general, but also in respect to a specific project. So this is also something you need to involve managers to make sure that someone is really, it's possible to send someone somewhere else, and he or her doesn't need to be in the local office for a certain project, for example. So these are all things you need to discuss before, because otherwise it ends in a certain chaos. But yeah, I think that the German law is as restrictive as it is. I would say it rather helps us, because you don't really need to take a lot of provisions before, because if you stick to German law, you will stick to most of the other jurisdictions as well.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. I was just going to say, that Stan's remark about the law, the legal situation, the regulatory situation brings to my mind that there are not only two players, not only about the employee and employers, it's also about the rules that come from the government. And you say we're strict here, David. So from your perspective, it makes it easier, because if it works here, kind of the other countries will be more lenient. But what I'm wondering about this is, it seems to me that the German lawmaker, they're trying to do it good for the people, mostly for the employees. But I often wonder, am I so special that I don't feel it's good for me? I often feel that what they're doing is harming me as a freelancer, and I guess in general as a person who wants to be autonomous or self-determined in the kind of work. And I also feel like, Stan, what you said, now this law about the working time makes it harder for an employer to do what I want, namely to make the employer allow me to work on the times and the way that I want to. So how does this contradiction come about? I don't know. Is it because they always think about people working in doing handiwork, and they're not yet in the 21st century, with most of the work being kind of intellectual work or office work? Or is it my work perspective? Am I too much of a kind of intellectual or I don't know, freelance perspective? Help me out here.
The German Working Act, I mean, goes back to European guideline, but comes from a time where people used to work in producing premises, and of course it's not fitting to the modern working conditions. German legislation is discussing to change it all the time. Haven't been successful so far. I don't really believe that this will happen very quickly. So I think we need to discuss that for a longer time. I mean, the problems you just described, you can, for example, in case of a vocation, a very concrete case is you need to make a break for 11 hours until you can start your next working day. Especially in a vacation, it could make sense to, if your family is with you and they have free time all the time, it could make sense to split your working day into smaller parts, for example, if it's possible for your tasks. And this, in many cases, for example, if you then go back to the desk in the evening at 10 o'clock or so, and continue 2 hours working, this would mean you can start working in the morning again, regardless of how chilling your day was. So this is really not fitting to the current times, and needs change. I think most of the people sitting here and having this mindset agree on that quite clearly.
So why don't we do it? Well, I read the question here from Dirk. Do we need a new EU legislation on mobile workforce enablement, at least to improve things in the EU, maybe even creating competitive advantage theory thereby? But why don't we do it? I'm not a lawyer, but I don't understand it. If you and I, and we're not geniuses, we're smart people, but if we and I know it, then the politicians should know it as well, shouldn't they? Then you're smiling.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, the European Union would be the right place to be a role model and on that. Yeah. On the other side, as a lawyer, I always scratch my head a bit by saying, is it a good idea, a smart idea to introduce different law sets? Yeah, because at the end of the day, we belong to the lucky ones. Yeah, we love our jobs. There's plenty of work ahead. We are well paid. Yeah, but are we the reality? And is it good that the law maybe differentiates between white and blue, black, whatever? Yeah. So you come to a level where the answers become quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's politically really one of those questions. It's hard to address in Germany. I always come across this, like whenever I feel we have quite high employment protection standards, right? It's not just stuff like we've discussed here, but it's also the rules around termination we are having there, you know, it's much more secure than in many other jurisdictions we know. Also representation on boards, for example, like, you know, that you need to represent the workforce also in supervisory boards and so on. And I feel it's a topic it's hard to discuss because it's always coming to those big, almost ethical questions immediately. It's very hard to just discuss one point where you say, oh, this might be better in a different way, because people always bring it up to those, like you give up employment protection totally if you change just a minor thing. I wonder why. Maybe it's a cultural thing, because, like, you know, workers fought so hard for it that they're afraid that we like dilute the standards too easily. I don't know, but it feels very stubborn. It feels very closed-minded, the whole topic. Like,
picking up Sten's point, I think it's many years ago, employees were really in the worst situation. Employers had a lot of power, and then employees not really. Today, it's not completely different, because there are still employees who need this protection. But on the other hand, there are highly qualified employees who can choose their employer as they want, and these guys are not really needing this sort of protection. So there are differentiated approaches also for the working time issue. For example, just making it possible for people with a certain salary, and then still at a voluntary basis. But of course, this then leads to a very differentiated legal situation, not making life for everybody easier. And I think this also leads to why we stick to that situation at the moment.
Maybe let's bring it a little bit back to the workation very concretely, because I like, Katharina, that you said you do love to be in a co-workation space. When I Googled the term workation, you know what came up? First of all, co-workation spaces. And then the second thing came up were hotels or some kind of resorts or places that says, do your workation here. So it was a kind of like a marketing aspect of or, you know, trick for certain venues to brand themselves. And in the call we had, David and Katharina, you said even whole countries do that. The data centers, come to us, we are the kind of vocation place. So I'm interested in this kind of marketing aspect that the term has taken on. Well, any thoughts on that, or how do you see that?
It's an entire industry by now, and not just vocation. It's even much more this digital nomad thing, right? That you do have infrastructure for people who depend on, you know, reliable internet and so on to travel. I mean, the example I gave was Madeira, Portugal. They have an entire government-funded program they call the Nomad Village, which is like everything set up to attract people who want to work remotely and can work remotely to come. Especially also during COVID, you know, when they had the island phenomenon, they were still, you know, you tested when you came on the Canary Islands, and Madeira were still perceived as pretty safe. So they continued this program. Actually, I think it's an opportunity to develop and, you know, bring people into certain areas, thereby bringing, you know, revenue in and so on. On the other hand, it means, you know, when you travel, you never know how well is the internet in the hotel. Who doesn't know this, like, pool internets that are going nuts at night because everyone's watching Netflix. So I think those safe working environments are also great. And then people also like the community. I think at least a certain amount of people. I think this is not the typical family setting that, you know, want to extend during you know, when the kindergarten is closed, their vacation time. But this is more than the millennial or whatever the single traveler who's looking for community. And that's what they also offer highly, like with, you know, yoga classes around it, a community manager often, like someone who orchestrates the entire thing. They all go on a digital platform where you can, like, when you enter into a co-working space, you go into a digital community and you have certain working groups, interest groups, and so on. So it's very easy to immerse yourself into another environment, to not feel lonely, and to really, leverage that.
That's interesting. And you said, Katharina, you've done it. Sten and David, have you done it? Have you extended your vacation and said, I'll add 2 weeks of work, or are you going back when the vacation is over?
Not yet, but we have a policy. But we have a policy in the firm for some time, with a lot of countries possible, but not yet.
Okay. Sten, what about you?
Yeah, I did it already before. So even before the pandemic situation. I like it. I like the flexibility. I like the freedom about that. And sometimes I tell my clients as well, some of the rules you shouldn't take too serious. Yeah. On the other side, you can't give it in writing. You shouldn't put it into a policy, whatever. Yeah. But some of the things are, reality is faster than legislation anyway, and sometimes you just have to give it a try. Of course, you should be aware of the risks, but extending the vacation, working a bit longer is not really a risky one. Well, what I find very interesting talking to clients, and you touched it a bit, Katharina, is there's a tendency, especially in Germany, to treat everything the same. So when we discuss policies and allowing remote work, vacation, it always has to be, okay, we need to cover whole Europe, or we need to cover the rest of the world, and there should be the same piece of sets and policies and rules. And when you dig into that, and we do that together with IT providers, so we are preparing a map where you can click on by saying, if I stay there 10 days, what happens in this country? You realize very, very quickly that each country is different. Yeah. So you move the button on the timeline, and Austria pops up after 30 days. And when you ask yourself, why for the hell does it happen? You can watch at it. And so each country does it differently. And when you look at that, we are telling the clients, look, this is a perfect tool. Forget about that you need a policy, treat everything the same. Have a look at the map and figure out, and I like what you were saying, Katharina, there are countries which are safer. Allow it for these, and don't touch the countries where it is bloody complicated. Where you immediately have to report something, or you break the law, or whatever. Forget about the idea to come up with a policy which fits to all the countries, to the region. Even the European Union is a bad example, because when you look at a map, and we have such a map, even the European Union is divided. Just when you look at it from a remote work perspective. But I understand that it is difficult for companies to come up with a policy having this kind of flexibility in it.
But it does make sense. I mean, why wouldn't you kind of derive the policy from the legislation of the country, rather than saying we must have one policy that fits all?
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea of this map. Saying, okay, have a look at the map and play a bit with the time frame, and you will quickly realize you can work easily remotely in Poland up to 100 days without anything happening except an A1 application. And in Austria, it's just 30 days. Yeah, okay. We can't change that. Yeah,
I don't know, Sten, if you have the map in your head, but is it like
it exists already.
From countries that have the shorter time, and the unattractive countries that have the longer time? Is that true? Or
yeah. No. One of the participants, Jürgen, we were working with on that, so it's already a pilot.
Well, that's cool. Well, maybe another aspect to touch on. You mentioned it several times, Katharina, as the digital nomads. So we said it's not the same as Workation, because Workation is done, and I like that, when you said it's done by the normal employee, and that gives it the kind of volume and the in a certain way also political dimension that we touched upon just now, but it certainly makes it an economical necessity to think about for the employers, because it's now really a lot of people. It's not only the special case or a high-ranking manager, it's really a lot of people that companies want to attract. But if we separate that from and talk a little bit about the digital nomads, because I think it's an interesting concept. also related to it in some way, because it does say more or less, it says it becomes the new normal to work at whatever place you want to work. And like you said, Katharina, before, it doesn't stand. I love that. Shake your head and you say, Katharina, you said before, it's like the working time where it was an issue. You have to work from 9 to 5. Now you can work whenever you want. And so maybe it is the new normal that you can work wherever you want. So maybe David and Katharina first, and then Sten, you put us all straight. If you have to say something, David, yeah.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in the beginning. I think the normal employees, it's a different name, yeah, but the normal employees just get one step closer to the digital nomads. I think this is what happens with that workation trend. They don't become digital nomads. Not all of them wants to work for the whole year and wherever, because they have their family in Germany and so on. But I think they get one step closer. And by that, making it just more standard and mainstream, that this is just possible. And I think this will also make life easier for people who wants to go beyond that. So while digital nomads are still some sort of exotic people for some companies, I think this will sort of change also during that trend.
Thank you, Katharina.
They are most often freelancers, you have to say. It's very, I don't think that there's a lot of examples of people who are like, permanently employed for a company. But what I know a lot of people who've like changed actually their contracts, they left companies and became freelancers, basically doing their primary job, which in Germany is again difficult, of course, because of all the like Scheinselbstständigkeitsproblem and so on. But this is what a lot of people do. And again, I think it's a boheme thing. I think right now it's not a huge group, but I think traveling, it's just something more people like to do, and it's an increasing trend, and it's becoming so easy with the internet and everything, right? It's not like when you travel to India in the 60s, this was like, that was like terra incognita. That's not the case anymore. You Google your hotel, you go there, it's all very, very easy. So I think more and more people will consider that approach, maybe even just for a limited point of time, like kind of this work and travel year you do after graduation. Maybe this is something to start your working career with like freelancing for a year before you finally settle in a permanent job somewhere.
And worth mentioning, the internet connection is better everywhere than in Germany.
True.
Even in Spain, or especially in Spain, that's true. Sten, you shook your head. I'd like to know why.
Yeah. I love this digital nomad thing, which is about immigration. Yeah, because it is clearly a door opener and it addressing a pain point. Yeah, because as soon as you leave the European Union, to be honest, working in South Africa, whatever, even a single day is breaking the law. Yeah, and the digital nomad visa addresses this thing, so which is good. But on the other side, there's an open door, but when you move to this door, you figure out very quickly it doesn't address a single thing, social security-wise, tax-wise, etc. So there's a big mismatch between opening the door, telling people you are allowed to work here without having any response, tax and social security-wise. So therefore, I love it, but it is just the first step. And when you deal with these rules, you realize immediately it doesn't help you at all avoiding the PE issue. It doesn't address the social security thing. So from that point of view, I have to shake my head. It's not the answer. It might be a step into the right direction, but it is just the first step, really.
So maybe we have like 4 minutes left. Maybe as a final round, same question to all three of you. Is there anything that should be done? If you want to talk about the legal perspective or the legislative perspective, do that, or recommendations that you have for employers, or maybe even from the perspective of the employees. So what is there something that you think should be out there as an advice or as a vision, as an idea that you have? And I don't know, Sten, I'll start with you. Something you want to tell the audience.
Yeah, two tiny issues. There's a pretty good development already ongoing in the European community because they are addressing the social security rules. They have to be more flexible, which is good. So I fully support this initiative and I like what's going on there. The second is, and I'm repeating myself, don't address this the same way. Be flexible as an employer as well. Don't come up with the idea, one policy for the rest of the world. It doesn't work. But if you are flexible, it works perfectly. Yeah.
Well, thank you, David.
I agree. The European Union, I think it's very important that we find some common principle in this respect to enable workation, at least in the European Union, quite uncomplicated. And there are discussions already. Still, it will take some time. And I think it's not recommended for employers to wait for that, because then you might miss a trend. And the other thing is, Sten also mentioned that briefly, the question of risk affinity. I mean, if you make it very clearly to yourself, every time you worked in a vacation just for a few hours or checked some emails, you have caused probably the same risk as everybody working doing a vacation in the same country, because this is also work from a country where you usually don't work. And in the past, nobody cared, at least not in the law firms and my working environment. So I think the same risk approach, or maybe almost the same risk approach, could be made in these vacation things. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Katharina.
I will also take the map. I think exactly that. Think in solutions, not on problems. While it's so unclear, just focus on what we can do, and and implement that. And then I think maybe we need some more lobbying in that area. Maybe the LLE should think about how we lobby remote digital work more.
Well, let's take that as a closing remark. I love it, because what we did today was in some way, I think, some kind of lobbying, looking at it from a realistic perspective. Katharina, David, and Sten, I loved the discussion. I learned a lot. I got to say, I think it was very qualified, sophisticated discussion. I hope our audience did as well. We didn't have quite as many people as I had hoped to, but I got to say, I think content-wise, it was stellar, and we will have a recording for people to watch. And if Kenny tells me we have like 150 people watching these recordings, so I hope the word will get out, Katharina, and I hope there will be more workation, kind of evangelists out there in the future. Thank you very much, three of you, and hopefully see you to one of the following sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.